Chapter 2: The Celestial Trial. The first time Elias stepped into the Mandate's hangar, the ceiling seemed so high it could have been the underside of the sky. He had seen mechs before, of course, through chain-link fences, in smudged factory posters, as silhouettes passing over the rusted roofs of the slums, but those had always belonged to someone else's life. Products of distant stories told in oil-stained courtyards. Things to be watched, not touched. Today, the smell of lubricant and ozone folded around him like a hand closing, and for the first time he knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that his life would end or begin inside one. "Move," the guard behind him said. A baton prodded the small of his back. Its charge wasn't live, but the memory of its crackle from the med-screening hallway still hissed along his nerves. Elias walked, boots tapping on stained metal decking, each step sounding too loud in the cavernous space. The hangar was built into the old quarry hollow, its reinforced shell a ribcage of dark beams and pulsating conduits. The walls were sprayed with layers of ash-colored paint that never quite hid the rust bleeding through. Dampness collected in the high joints and dripped in patient mineral syllables. Smoke from the coolant vents hung in low sheets, catching the harsh white lights in dull halos. Mechs loomed on their docking racks like sleeping gods who had forgotten they were dead. Mandate frames gleamed behind security fields, sleek, articulated shapes and polished alloys, their limbs folded with predatory elegance. On distant catwalks, mechanics in crisp uniforms moved like pieces in a game, small and sure of their prescribed paths. Elias's wrists were bare and chafed where the restraint bands had been. A guard stepped ahead of him, gloved hands tapping at a wrist slate. A thin, insectile arm unfolded from a column in the wall, Mandate steel that had never touched dirt, and hovered over Elias's right forearm. "Rust-born, conscripted," muttered the guard, tone flat with disinterest. "Candidate 12, Elias Ree." Hearing his own name said aloud in this place felt like a clerical error. A cold ring pressed against his skin. Light flickered in its hollow center, tasting his blood, his bones, the worn marrow where hunger had left its first signatures. The ring clicked. A hot prick, a flash of white in his vision. When the machine lifted away, a new mark glowed beneath the grime. A biotag, thin lines of silvery script scored beneath the surface of his flesh, pulsing a faint, obedient blue. "Property logged," the wall voice intoned. The accent was upper-level Mandate. Vowels sterilized. "Trial participant authenticated." Elias flexed his fingers. The tag didn't hurt, but it felt wrong, as if a small door had been cut into him and left open. The guard noticed his look and snorted. "Don't stroke it like it's a blessing," she said. "It just means if you run, the towers will fry your organs before you hit the fence." The other guard laughed softly, that clipped Mandate chuckle, truncated at the edges like something programmable. "If he runs, I'll fry him myself. Waste of energy to let the guns have all the fun." They walked him farther in. The iron vulture waited on the cracked training sands beyond the main hangar floor, squatting like a wounded animal too stubborn to die. It had no protective rack, no service scaffold. The sand around its feet was soaked dark with old hydraulic spill, patches of it clotted into tarry crusts that caught the overhead light in reluctant gleams. Up close, the vulture was bigger than it had looked from the slum fences. Its hull was a patchwork of grafted plates, older generation armor bolted next to scavenged panels from models decades out of circulation. Bare cabling hung in ragged skeins from one shoulder. Carbon scoring traced black fingerprints across its chest. A strip of faded paint near the cockpit hatch still bore a serial code, mostly worn away by time and other pilots' hands. It smelled of old storms, ozone, burnt plastic, metal that had heated past safe limits and cooled again with a shudder. The scent of things asked to do too much for too long. "Glorious, isn't it?" one of the guards said lightly. "Last stop before the slag heap. Get in, Rust." Elias took a slow breath. The air tasted like metal and ion-scrubbed dust, nothing like the damp, coal-soured air of the tenements. That air had carried Mira's cough at night, the asthmatic rattle that had never quite become a wheeze because he had always managed, just, to bring in enough rations, enough counterfeit meds. Mira with her two thin fingers on his sleeve, the morning the Manders came. "Don't go, Eli." He had gone anyway. He set his jaw and reached for the ladder welded into the mech's leg. His hands left smeared prints in the dust on each rung. The metal was warm from residual energy, as if the machine still remembered motion. High above, suspended from thick cables in a bubble of reinforced glass and golden trim, the observation lounge gleamed like an eye. Inside, shadows moved. Mandate proctors clipped silhouettes against the backlit consoles, white uniforms catching light like teeth. Even at this distance, he could feel their watching. The hangar's loudspeakers carried faint laughter, flattened by speakers, but still acutely human. Something in that sound burrowed under the noise of the place and nestled in the small of his back, where fear liked to curl. His father's face rose unbidden, bristle-gray beard, oil ground so deep into the lines around his eyes it had never washed out. The old man had come home silent that last day, his hands empty of rations, his mandate-issued parser chip snapped clean in two. "They took the badge, Eli," he'd said, voice as numb as his eyes. "Rust don't belong in the sky." The next week his father had not woken. The debt counters had, though, and so had the guards. "Climb," the guard at the bottom of the ladder barked. Elias climbed. The cockpit hatch gaped above him like the open beak of the vulture. As he hauled himself inside, the smell intensified. Ionized air, stale sweat, the sour tang of old fear embedded in padding that had never been properly replaced. Somewhere beneath all that lay the faintest hint of something sweet and unspecific, like incense burned out long ago. The interior was cramped, tighter than he'd imagined. His shoulders brushed cold conduits on either side as he wedged himself into the pilot's couch. The harness web hung slack and frayed. When he pulled it across his chest, a strand snapped, lashing against his collarbone. His legs slid into the lower braces. Metal clamps ratcheted closed around his calves and ankles, nearer a vice than an ergonomic support system. Bone met machine with an ungentle finality. His knees bumped against obsolete control levers that jutted stubbornly from the console, holdovers from an earlier era of interface design that hadn't trusted nerve halo picks alone. The cockpit canopy lowered with a grinding complaint and sealed with a hiss, closing out the hangar's wider sounds and replacing them with the vulture's inner noises, the low thrum of idling capacitors, a faint rattling somewhere behind his left shoulder, the tinny buzz of unshielded circuits. The world contracted to a ring of cracked displays and a smear of the outside through the vulture's scarred viewport. The HUD flickered alive, stuttering through boot sequences that were never meant to be seen. Lines of obsolete code rolled past. Warning, gyro alignment compromised. Warning, left hip hydraulics, pressure irregular. Caution, neural lag exceeds safe parameters. Note, pilot heart rate elevated. An anatomical diagram ghosted briefly in the corner of his vision, a pale outline of a human pinned in a wireframe of the mech's systems. His pulse hammered at his temples, and the diagram's heart throbbed in sync, a small red flare caged inside gray ribs. Elias swallowed. His tongue tasted copper. He laid his hands on the twin control grips. The worn synthetic wrapped around them had been smoothed by years of other palms. As his fingers curled into place, microcontacts pressed against his skin, tasting him in the same way the wall machine had. A faint static crawled up his arms, skimming along his nerves, brushing the base of his skull. The vulture woke a little more. Additional readouts winked into place. Sound sharpened. He heard his own breath as if it came through distance, cycling in and out of his chest with mechanical regularity. Outside, boots clanged up the vulture's leg. Someone slapped the hull twice. An old signal, habit more than procedure now. "You're in, Rust." The voice came through a thin speaker over his left ear, distorted but clear. "You die fast, you save us all some paperwork." Above, in the observation sphere, laughter rippled again. He thought of Mira, lips pale, chest hitching, eyes too bright. He thought of his father's hands, one finger broken and never properly set, hovering above a mech console that would never respond to him again. Elias's jaw tightened. The clamps around his legs pressed in, as if the vulture itself sensed something in his muscles and answered with its own form of resolve. The trial, the mandate called it. Celestial, as if some god had signed off on it. To Elias, it felt more like being slid into a furnace to see what color he glowed before he crumbled. The gates rumbled like an old beast clearing its throat. The training arena lay beyond the hangar's main wall, an oval of packed sand and fused slag under the open maw of the quarry sky. The heavy doors that sealed it took their time, chains and pistons protesting decades of use as they crawled upward. Warning klaxons blared, rotating units painting the walls and spinning cones of red. Light lanced into the cockpit. For a moment, Elias could see nothing but white through the cracked viewport, a sunflash that turned the HUD's translucent warnings into ghosts. The Vulture's external mics picked up the wind first, a dry, abrasive rush carrying grit and the bitter tang of the Atmos mines far beyond the city. The air out there had flowed through the massive intake stacks, felt the cold kiss of mandate filtration, and come back tasting wrong to those who'd been born in its unfiltered version. "Candidate frames stand by," droned the arena's overseer voice. It was smoother than the wall voice, modulated to sound reassuring. A corporate priest blessing a sacrifice. Elias flexed his fingers again. The grips were slick now. He couldn't tell if it was from the condensation beating in the heat of the cockpit or from his own palms. The countdown appeared across his HUD, 10 seconds, each one punctuated by a deep tone that thrummed through the Vulture's skeleton. With each pulse, the mech's worn servos gave a small, anticipatory shiver, like muscles flexing in their sleep. He drew a breath that felt too shallow. The harness straps cut into his ribs. His heart beat faster, as if it thought it could outrun what was coming. "Come on," he murmured, not sure if he meant the Vulture, himself, or some god that had never shown the rust a kindly face. 9. Beyond the light glare, shapes solidified. Arena walls, high, studded with recessed emitters and old impact scars. Above them, tiers of seating like broken stone teeth. Most stood empty. This was just a trial, not a spectacle. But clusters of figures hunched here and there. Mandate officers with leisure time, bored techs, a few civils in their pale, unblemished fabrics. Their faces were indistinct, smeared by distance and haze. 8. Across the arena, a second gate opened with smooth, well-oiled grace. The figure that stepped through made the Vulture seem not old but prehistoric. Tall, balanced, radiating a sleek menace. Where the Iron Vulture was a cobbled thing of rivets and patch plates, this mech, the Mandate-class cadet frame, was art. Its armor was plated in sovereign gold, not painted but infused, the alloy catching the pale sunlight and bending it into something richer. Lines of pale blue energy traced filigree paths along its limbs, like veins glowing with captured starlight. The head was angular and fox-like, a narrow visage with sensor slits that burned a cold azure. Motors purred as it moved. No shudder, no lag, no complaint. Each step sank into the sand with a poised assurance that said, "I was built for this." "Candidate Kalen Voss, Mandate Cadet Frame Aurelian 03, announced the overseer. There was just enough warmth in the tone to mark the favorite. Voss's mech rolled one shoulder in a theatrical stretch, gold plates gleaming. It raised an arm, and the foreplate split along magnetic seams, unfolding to reveal a hilt nested in an energy cradle. The hilt lifted, drew itself into the mech's palm, and elongated with a rising hum into a blade made not of metal, but of concentrated plasma. The light it cast was sickle white, with a faint sea-green edge, its heat rippling the air. Elias swallowed again. The Vulture's own weapon systems pipped into existence on his HUD. A pair of low-powered forearm cannons, last calibrated 6 years ago. One close-range recycler, one badly rated vibroblade mounted under the right wrist. Maintenance status flickered. Incomplete, unknown. 7. A private comm channel chirped in his right ear, cutting through the overseer's background murmur. A voice flowed through, lazy and amused, carrying the cultured cadence of Mandate schooling. "So this is my opponent?" Kalen Voss drawled. "I could have sworn they said trial, not charity shift at the scrap ward." Elias's grip tightened. He tried to steady his breathing, but the air in the cockpit felt thicker now, as if the Vulture's filtration system had decided it preferred his carbon dioxide to oxygen. 6. The Proctor's lounge feed popped open in a corner of his HUD. Someone up there had patched their channel to the arena-wide speakers. Laughter spilled down, a buzz of chuckles, and the staccato snap of gloved hands slapping consoles. Voss drew a rust rat, someone said clearly. Female, bored, amused. "Lucky boy. Clean sweep for his first trial." Another voice. "What's the wager on time to systems failure?" "I give the Vulture." A pause, the sound of teeth clicking thoughtfully. 40 seconds after engagement. "Generous. Someone else scoffed. 5. The HUD allowed Elias to mute the feed. His thumb hovered over the option but didn't press it. It was important to hear how the gods laughed while he bled. Voss's voice softened, feigning courtesy. You hearing this down there? Try not to die too quickly, Rust. I did bring my best moves. Would be rude not to show them off. 4. Images flickered in Elias's mind, overlaid on the HUD. Mira's hollowed cheeks, mottled with the bruised yellow of poor air, her eyes immense in their sockets. The guards sneering during his medical screening, joking about whether his lungs would collapse before he made it to the cockpit. His father's shoulders squared against a torrent of insults as he walked out of the mandate bay for the last time, badge already gone. 3. His heart hammered harder. The vulture echoed it, or maybe he imagined that. The machine's internal rhythm tremored through the clamps on his legs, a slow, mechanical heartbeat that ran counter to his own frantic one. For a moment they wouldn't align, two tempos fighting, and the world tilted. He closed his eyes, inhaled, exhaled. Somewhere beyond the bulkheads, the Atmos mine chimneys were drawing in whole neighborhoods worth of breath, filtering it for mandate use, and spitting the dregs back down. It had always seemed to him that the sky in the Rust Quarter was paler than anywhere else, as if the mandate had bleached the color out of it along with the contaminants. 2. The Iron Vulture's limbs stiffened, servo whine rising. Dust avalanched off its shoulders in small patters, turned to golden motes where they crossed shafts of light. 1. Begin, said the overseer. The starting klaxon drowned everything. Voss moved first. The Aurelian O3 lunged forward with a dancer's ease, sand exploding in a controlled spray from beneath its feet. Its thrusters gave a musical whine, short bursts lifting its weight just enough to skim. The machine's limbs flowed through motion as if modulated by water, not servos. By contrast, when Elias urged the vulture forward, it lurched. He didn't move his arms so much as think about moving them, and then shove that thought into the bulky interface. Old nerve halo pickups at the base of the seat haloed his spine in prickling static, trying to synchronize with his nervous system, and finding only partial purchase. The vulture responded like an old man woken in the dark by a distant alarm, confused, offended, but grudgingly awake. Its right leg drove hard into the sand, sank too deep, hydraulics wheezing. The left followed, slightly out of time. The chassis pitched, caught itself with a belated hiss from compensator jets. The HUD stuttered warnings at him. Lag compensation exceeded. Structural stress, right knee assist brace. Recommendation, reduce maneuvers. Come on, Elias whispered through his teeth that juddered with every jolt. You've walked before. Once this mech had belonged to a mandate pilot who hadn't come home. It remembered the sky, even if no one cared that it did. Voss could have closed the distance immediately. Instead, the gold mech paced the vulture in a wide circling run, tracing a luminous ring in the sand. He fired twice, warning shots, as promised. Bolts of compressed plasma streaked past the vulture's cockpit, close enough that the canopy glass shivered, and heat washed across Elias's face. The sand outside fused where they hit, turning to black, glassy scars. Careful now, Voss said, his voice echoing across the arena, through the amplified channel. Wouldn't want to singe the paint on that beauty. Oh wait, the proctors laughed, delighted. Elias hauled at the controls, pain spiking up from his kneecaps, as the leg clamps translated the vulture's missteps into pressure on his flesh. He tried to sidestep the next pass, but the neural lag made his intentions glut and stick. By the time the vulture's bulk had persuaded its old servos to respond, Voss was already elsewhere, his mech's golden blur sliding along the periphery. The HUD tried to track him, target box jerking drunkenly, playing catch-up. Mira's face hovered at the edge of Elias's vision, not as memory, but as certainty. If he failed here, the Atmos mines would find her. The debt counters would make sure of that. Rustborn didn't die cleanly under the mandate. They were recycled. His stomach cramped. Sweat stung his eyes. A third bolt slammed into the sand a meter to the vulture's right, close enough that the shockwave shook the entire frame. The mech staggered. Elias's forehead clipped the internal brace. Impact right lateral. Armor integrity 82%. Pilot vitals, instability detected. Look at him dance, someone laughed overhead. The poor thing thinks he's in 0G. Don't insult the fleet, another proctor responded dryly. Even their washouts have more grace. Voss's voice again, theatrical sorrow. You're making them cruel on your behalf, Rust. That's not very polite. I'll give you a chance. Show me you can at least raise your hand. He darted in closer on the next pass. The Aurelian O3's plasma blade hummed as it swept up, not to strike, but to draw a shining line inches from the vulture's left side. The heat peeled paint and scorched through the top layers of misaligned armor. Panels glowed dull red in the wake. Something in the vulture answered with a crackling groan, a structural brace protesting. Elias flinched, but there was nowhere to go. The cockpit walls curved tight around him, unforgiving. He yanked at the right-hand grip, firing the forearm cannon on instinct. The vulture's right arm jutted up, barely coordinated. The shot spat out as a sickly, undercharged bolt that tore a furrow through the sand and fizzled 10 meters short of Voss's mech. Oh, Voss said. He sounded genuinely delighted. It barks. Mark the hit radius on that, a proctor chuckled. Useful in case we need to vaporize the first 3 rows, perhaps. Elias's breaths came faster. The clamps around his legs didn't loosen, but they seemed to shift, invisible fingers tightening until his calves burned with tingling numbness. Every impact from outside translated into pressure at his shins and thighs, a crude haptic array that doubled as punishment. He tried to will the panic down. It scratched at his throat, looking for a way out. His body wanted to bolt, but there was nowhere to run. Just metal and straps, and the weight of the vulture's old expectations pressing in. He had chosen this. He reminded himself of that with a kind of savagery. Better the cockpit than the mines. Better a clean probability of death than the slow certainty of watching Mira cough herself hollow. Engage, Candidate 12, the overseer prompted blandly. Demonstrate offensive capability. Offensive. The word felt wrong in his mouth. The only thing offensive here was the gap between him and the gold machine dancing circles around him. He tried another step forward. The vulture obeyed, just late enough for it to matter. Each time he thought to move, he met the drag of old codes, half-burned firmware trying to interpret the impulses of a brain it had never met before. The HUD stuttered. Synchronization 61%. Response lag unacceptable. In the slums, old women sometimes talked about the machines under the mandate's control as if they had their own spirits, steel dragons bound by iron oaths. Children laughed, men sneered. Elias had always listened in silence. Now, feeling the vulture's reluctant answers scrape through his nerves, he wondered which god he had offended to earn this particular guardian. Kalen Voss was not bored, not exactly, but he was working at not looking bored. The Aurelian O3 moved like quicksilver beneath his commands. It translated his smallest shifts of intent into balletic motion, thrusters and servos harmonizing, an orchestra of power and poise. He knew pilots who treated their frames like lovers, cooing at them in maintenance bays, smoothing fingertips over armor panels. For Voss, the mech was an extension of his birthright. His grandfather had overseen the first wave of mandate compliance on this planet. His father had a cruiser named after him in orbit. Metal obeyed their family. That didn't mean playing with scrap couldn't be fun. He toggled the comm amplifier, letting his words bleed out into the arena as he pivoted, drawing another lazy arc of blade light in front of the vulture's stumbling form. "Your mech's an antique," he said. "I think my great-grandfather shot at one of those during the subjugations. Tell me, Rust, do you need a hand crank to start her heart?" Laughter, predictable and gratifying, showered down from the lounge. He flicked his wrist, blade humming, and sent a precise bolt from his shoulder-mounted projector to slam into the sand directly behind the vulture. The explosion sprayed glass-sharp particles against the back of the old mech's legs, little crystalline needles that skittered harmlessly off the plated joints, but made for a nice pressure wave. The vulture bucked. Inside, he imagined, the Rustborn was eating his own tongue, trying not to scream. "He's panicking," a voice in the lounge observed clinically. That would be Proctor Wren, the woman who drilled Voss on mid-orbit maneuver. "See his pattern? No forward pressure, just reactive. You indulging yourself, Voss?" "Yes, Proctor," he replied easily. "It's my trial, isn't it? I thought I'd give the crowd a bit of theater." "Don't break the toy before you show us the form," another Proctor called. Male, older, the one who wore his uniform like it had grown around him. "Wouldn't dream of it," Voss said. It was then that he decided to show them the crescent. He angled the Aurelian O3's stance, adjusting weight, feeling the minute shifts through his own body despite the cushioning of the pilot cradle. The crescent slash was taught early in the Mandate academies, a foundational form, but to do it beautifully, that took practice. He let the arena's murmur fall away for a moment, focusing on the invisible geometry, the path his mech would take, the arc of the blade, the pull of gravity against thrust. Somewhere in the quarry, a wind eddied, scenting the sand with something faintly metallic and wrong. He ignored it. "Eyes up, Proctors," he said lightly. "This one's for the hollows." He propelled the Aurelian O3 forward in a three-step sequence. First, a gliding approach, low and fast. Second, a lateral shift that kicked a fan of sand into a rising curtain. Third, a coiled release, blades sweeping up and outward in a wide, luminous arc. The plasma carved the air. For a fraction of a moment, the light hung visible even after the blade had passed, a bright comb in the sand surface. Where it touched earth, the arena floor fused and curled away, a sickle-shaped trench of gloss-black glass scribed across the battlefield. The heat hit the vulture's left arm. Armor bubbled and blackened, surface paint vaporized, rising in a scorched haze. The mech's internal sensors registered the blow and cried out in a cascade of wails that bled into Elias's cockpit. "Elegant," murmured someone above. "Crescent slash, basic pattern," Voss said, breath just a little faster from the thrill of perfectly executed motion. For instructional purposes, of course. The heat from the crescent slash seared across the vulture's left side. Warnings screamed in his ears, but they were background to the more immediate sensations. A pounding thud through the left leg clamps, a sharp sting at his shin as one of the rusted bolts inside shifted and bit. His calf spasmed. He bit down on the impulse to yank his leg free. The clamps would not permit it. Instead, the vulture translated his flinch into a graceless half-step that dragged its left foot through the fresh trench of vitrified sand. The sensation that shot through the cockpit was like walking barefoot across coals. The mech staggered, weight tilting perilously. Elias's vision lurched. For a nauseating heartbeat, mech and pilot were slightly out of phase. The machine's fall came a beat ahead of his inner ear's report, and the dissonance made bile scale his throat. He tasted acid and rust. Left leg, damage detected. Hydraulic pressure drop, 34%. Recommendation, cease aggressive maneuvers. Hydraulic fluid hissed somewhere below. A hot spray hit his shins, sharp and wet, seeping through the hairline cracks in the cockpit's aging seals. It felt unpleasantly like blood, thick and oily, running over his skin and into the folds of his trousers. He gasped, not from pain, but from the claustrophobic grossness of it. The clamps bit down harder as the system tried to compensate for the leg's buckling support. His ankles burned. Pins and needles fire flared up into his calves, then settled into a deep, throbbing numbness. "Ah," Voss said, satisfaction thick in his tone. "There it is. Found your weak leg, have we?" The gold mech stepped in close, far closer than necessary, and placed a massive hand against the vulture's chest. The contrast was almost comical. Ornate, smooth armor plate against gnarled, pitted plating. There was a gentle, almost fond moment of contact. Then, Voss pushed. The vulture, already off balance, went to its knees. The impact slammed through Elias's body, a full-body blow even the worn padding couldn't blunt. His teeth rattled. His head snapped forward. His forehead met the HUD panel with a bright flash of light. For half a second, the cockpit went silent, as if the mech had skipped a beat in sympathy. Then sound rushed back. Alarms, Proctor's laughter, the rising roar of the onlookers who had finally scented true humiliation. Hydraulic fluid gushed more freely now around his lower legs, hot and cruel, pinning them in place as it cooled and thickened, seeped into seams and hardened. The clamps tightened to counter the slippage, grinding against bone. His legs began to go away from him. First, the sensation of temperature blurred, hard to tell hot from cold acid sensation. Then the precise map of where muscle ended and metal began fuzzed. His toes might as well have been on another planet. "Beautiful," someone purred from the lounge. "Make him kneel properly, Voss." "On your knees before the mandate," another voice chimed in, dripping with ritualized mockery. "See, even their scrap mechs know their place." The vulture's chassis half buried itself in the sand, the front ridge of its armored knees digging grooves. Elias felt the machine's humiliation like a second skin. For all its age and faults, it bent under no one easily. Forced down like this, it shuddered, old frames groaning. Elias's vision blurred. For a moment, what he saw on the fractured canopy glass was not the arena, but the tenement courtyard, with its cracked cement and crooked tar-smeared lines. He heard the omni-rail screaming overhead, the mandate train that never stopped in the rust quarter, just howled across it, a long metallic animal delivering goods to the clean levels. He smelt coal smoke and cheap broth, Mira giggling as his father balanced a stripped servomotor on his head for her amusement. Then those images burned away under the harsh glare of the current moment. "I can end this now, Rust," Voss said conversationally, his blade tip resting inches from the vulture's cockpit. Through the charred transparencies, Elias could see the shimmering field of its heat. Little rivulets of softened sand dripped down its length in droplets that cooled to glass before they hit the ground. "Say the word. Yield. Crawl. Whatever the proper term is down in the soot holes. Candidate 12, the overseer's voice came through, pitch devoid of sympathy. You may request cessation of trial. Note, cessation will be recorded as failure. Mandate obligations remain in place. Which meant he could quit, and the mines would still take what they were owed. Maybe he wouldn't be the one sent. Maybe they'd take Mira instead, remove the liability of her weak lungs from the slum's overburdened air. "Finish it already," muttered someone overhead. "We have 3 more trials to log before shift change." "A spectacle's only worth it if the object breaks," another replied cheerfully. "Let the boy sweat. Voss, show us something pretty before you carve him open." Inside the vulture, Elias's breath hitched. He realized distantly that he was on the edge of something. Not victory, that was laughable. Not even survival in any conventional sense. It was a narrower ledge than that, a place between 2 falls. On one side, surrender. A word, a gesture, and this would all stop. The vulture's systems would power down around him, and he would be hauled out like faulty cargo and reassigned. The ache in his legs would fade, replaced by the steady, grinding pain of the mine's air and Mira's absence. On the other, he stayed kneeling, not in submission, but in defiance so small it might never be seen. He let Voss play, let the mandate laugh, but he did not say the word. He could make this choice, at least, his. His lungs burned. Each inhale scraped. The vulture's cockpit felt smaller with every breath, as if the walls were leaning in to listen to his decision. He thought of his father's eyes when they had taken the badge. Not broken, no, never that, but emptied of something, filled with the knowledge that he had bent when he had not meant to. "I won't," Elias rasped. His voice was a dry creak in the enclosed space, lost beneath the alarms, but the mech heard him. Where his hands gripped the controls, where his spines met the scratched neural pickups, something in the feedback loop notched, just slightly. He pushed his palms down. The vulture tried to rise. Its right leg spasmed uselessly. The left, half crippled by the crescent slash, refused entirely. Hydraulics whined. A new shower of sparks burst from a torn shoulder conduit, painting the cockpit in brief staccato orange. The attempt translated on the outside as a pathetic twitch, a jerky half-lift that only made the vulture look more thoroughly conquered. Voss laughed. "Brave, I admire that. Pointless but admirable." "You admire the way rats keep chewing when they're cornered?" came a light comment from above. "Rats have uses," someone else replied. Elias's chest tightened. The laugh track blurred into a single smear, an ugly roar that circled the arena like a hungry thing. His heart beat against it. For one fragile moment, he felt utterly alone. The vulture's hull became a shell at the bottom of the sea, the outside world a distorted pressure domain. He tried to picture Mira's face again, but even that wouldn't focus properly. Her outline wobbled, her features collapsing into the vague notion of someone he needed to protect. Faceless, under layers of want and fear. His legs burned. Then they didn't. The numbness had crept farther, settling in like a squatter. Where the hydraulic fluid touched skin, it cooled, leaving clammy trails. He shivered. The HUD's borders flickered. His pulse reading spiked higher. Pilot stress level critical. Oxygen uptake irregular. Advisory suggested cessation. The machine, at least, was honest in its fear for him. He scraped the back of his tongue against his teeth, chasing saliva. His mouth was sand-dry. From somewhere outside himself, the words surfaced. "Get up." They didn't sound like his father's voice, nor Mira's, nor anyone he knew. They cut clean, like a command written directly on the vulture's old firmware. He couldn't obey. His body was trapped, his machine maimed, his options narrowed to this pinprick of stupid will. But he could refuse the other command. He could refuse to beg. Kalen Voss poised for the finale. He had lasted longer than the initial bet, he noted with mild annoyance. Someone who had wagered 40 seconds would argue. He could have ended it at 30 and still delivered a clean crescent demonstration. But there was a way these things were supposed to go. The families who caught these trial recordings in their evening feeds liked a certain shape to their narratives. The Rustborn came in snarling, were knocked down, were offered mercy, refused to know their place, and were punished. Justice, the mandate called it. Spectacle, Voss understood. And spectacle had a rhythm. He spun the Aurelian O3's blade in a series of tight circles, warming up for the extended pattern. Plasma light arched around the golden frame, strobing over the vulture's charred hull. The crowd leaned in, the lounge filling with that particular silence that only came before something decisive. "Observe," Proctor Wren said softly to the room, to the cadets watching on auxiliary feeds. "This is the mandate's judgment made manifest. Precision, efficiency, mercy when requested." "And when not requested," murmured someone. Wren's smile didn't quite carry into her voice. "Efficiency, all the same." "Your final lesson, Rust," Voss said, amplifying his calm so the entire arena could hear him. "Celestial power takes what it wants from the ground. That's the order of things. Not personal, just physics." He spread the mech's arms in a mock ritualistic gesture, blade humming above in a crescent of searing potential. The proctors, amused, half applauded. "Crescent slash, extended," he announced, voice lilting. "Pay attention. There will be a test." Inside the cockpit, the air thickened. The Vulture's fans labored, their tired whir trying and failing to clear the accumulating heat and the faint acrid tang of insulation starting to surrender. Sweat rolled down Elias's temples, stinging the shallow cut on his forehead. He blinked, and the blood-salted moisture left red streaks on the inside of the canopy where his eyelids brushed. The HUD screamed. "Structural failure imminent. Forecast 89% probability of core breach within 120 seconds at current assault projection. 2 minutes, then, if Voss played light and poetic. Less if he stabbed straight." The cabin seemed to shrink further. Every breath he drew came back thicker, less satisfying, as if the air had more memory than oxygen in it. He could hear his own pulse in his ears, pounding and then doubling, tripling. At first he thought it was just his heart. But then he realized the second pulse ran at a different tempo, a deeper, slower beat, resonating through the mech's chassis, like a forgotten engine, forcing itself awake. Is this how Father felt? He wondered, though he knew his father had never been in a trial like this. The old man had flown maintenance rigs, dull little things that skittered along hulls, nothing with weapons. The idea didn't fit. This was his moment, not an inherited shadow. His and Mira's, because everything he did now either added seconds to her life or shaved them off. He blinked away the blur creeping in from the edges of his vision. His gaze skated across the console, looking for anything, any overlooked option. Most of the panels were either dead, flickering, or dedicated to systems too damaged to obey. Some distant rational part of his mind cataloged what he saw. Toggle switches with worn lettering, cracked ceramic insulators, an old charm string someone had wrapped around a structural brace. Little talismans inserted into a machine that had no place for gods. He forced his attention down to the narrow gap between two warped panels near his right knee. He hadn't meant to look there. His eyes just fell on it, the way water found a lower place. Something inside that gap caught the dim cockpit light differently. Black, but not the dull, light-eating black of burnt plastic. More like the deep sheen of void between stars, if such a thing could be condensed into a jagged sliver. It had been there when he first climbed in. He remembered registering it as another piece of scavenged trash wedged among the Vulture's innards, a shard of obsidian someone had stuck there for luck. Maybe. Rustborn loved their scraps of meaning. He had barely registered it then. He registered it now because his hand, trembling and slick, reached out toward it without his asking. "Any last words?" Voss's voice purred, distant and too loud all at once. The blade light outside drew longer arcs, trailing afterimages across the cracked transparency. Elias's fingers brushed the shard. It was cold. That was the first, absurd detail. The cockpit was an oven, metal baked under plasma offwash. His own skin burned where it met harness and clamp. But the shard's surface felt like stone left overnight in desert shade. Then it was not cold. Heat flared up through his fingertips, not on the surface but inside the bones. A strange, dense warmth that reminded him of the furnace glows he'd seen in the illegal foundries when he was younger. Metal heated to the point of yielding. The warmth didn't sear his flesh. It threaded up his arm, following the paths his nerves traced with a curious, attentive slowness. He should have flinched, pulled his hand away. Old street instincts told him to recoil from unknown tech, to never trust mandate scraps. They sometimes left fail-safes in their throwaways, barbs for curious rust kids. But this didn't feel like mandate tech. There was no hum of charge, no chemical tang. Instead, as his fingers closed around it fully, drawn as much by despair as by anything else. The alarms dulled, their shriek receded, as if someone had stuffed cotton between him and the speakers. Time, obedient until now to the overseer's countdown, stuttered. Outside, the Aurelian O3's blade traced another luminous curve. The arc stretched longer than it should have, hanging in the air like a fractured moon. Sand particles that had been tumbling in the wake of its passage slowed, suspended in midair, each grain lit in stark relief against the harsh arena light. In the viewing tiers, the few spectators leaned forward, but their movements smeared, elongated. Elias blinked. The slow fall of his eyelids met no rush of darkness. Sight held, clear and continuous, sliding past the mechanical limits of his own biology. His heart still thudded in his chest, urgent and fast. The vulture's deeper beat went on, fathoms lower, unbothered by the surface chaos. The shard in his hand pulsed. It didn't emit light, not in any conventional sense. But his perception of the cockpit shifted around it. Edges sharpened. The hairline fractures in the canopy glass resolved into distinct paths, each one tracing an old impact, an older strain. He reached with his free hand toward the control grip, and for a moment could see, not imagine, not infer, but see, the lines of force that would ripple through the vulture's frame if he moved it now. Weak points flared image red in his mind's eye. Strong ones glowed a subtler, steadier tone. The shard's warmth climbed his forearm and sank into his chest, nestling around his ribcage like fingers lacing together. It wasn't comforting exactly. It was aligning. In the stand, someone dropped a drink. Elias watched a glistening bead of liquid rise from its cup, hover, spin, and then start to fall at a leisurely, considerate pace. At the edges of his awareness, the mandate's voice continued, tinny and distant. Proctor's murmuring, Voss offering his cruel little homily about physics. But all of that seemed to have retreated into a tunnel. In here, inside the vulture, it was just him, the machine's skeleton, and the impossible shard. It beat once. A few things happened at once, if there could be such a thing as once, in this new, skewed flow. The clamps around Elias's legs relaxed, imperceptibly, as if some subroutine had been briefly confused. The numbness in his feet flickered, just for an instant. He could feel his toes again, trapped in boots soaked with cooling hydraulics. The neural pickups at the base of his skull sparked, not painfully, but with the sensation of a lock turning in a door that had always been painted shut. The vulture's HUD blinked, its error messages collapsing and reforming. Synchronization, 63%, 67%, 71%. Unidentified input source detected. Status. The status line stuttered, letters flickering through unreadable characters misted with static, before stabilizing as a single, stubborn word. Awaiting. Awaiting what? Elias thought, and the question seemed to slide not just through his own mind, but into the machine's. The vulture's inner hum answered, deep and oddly eager. Outside, the gold mech loomed, frozen in the slow, deliberate continuation of its killing form. The plasma blade's light painted the cockpit in greenish white. Voss, cocooned in his own cradle of luxury and interfaces, had his eyes fixed forward, expression caught half between concentration and arrogance. In the observation lounge, a proctor's hand hung halfway to a console switch. The overseer's readout scroll crawled by at a glacial pace. Elias stood, or rather, he sat, clamped and half-buried, but some essential self in him had come upright. He realized, with a clarity that cut through the fear, that this was the last sliver of a moment before the universe decided what to do with him. The trial had been about measuring worth as the mandate defined it. Obedience, precision, a certain kind of controlled brutality. But there was another measure here, an older one, hidden between panels in an aging mech. His fingers tightened around the shard. It did not cut him. It pressed back, shaping itself to his grasp with impossible pliancy, like metal remembering a different phase of being. The warmth surged one step higher, kissing the base of his skull, threading through the places where his nerves met machine. Beneath the arena, beneath the quarry, beneath the layers of stripped earth and stolen ore, something old and patient perhaps stirred. Or perhaps that was just the Iron Vulture's tired heart, tasting for the first time in years something that was not rest, not exhaust, but possibility. The gold blade descended in the thickened air. The proctors leaned forward. Mira coughed somewhere in the closed circuit of his memory. Elias's breath steadied, hanging between panic and something stranger. On the knife edge between annihilation and an unnamed new fate, poised in that stretched-out heartbeat, Elias Ree, who had crawled through the rust quarter his whole life, sat in the cracked cockpit of a dying mech, turned his hand around an impossible piece of obsidian, and did not look away.